Hello, everyone, no matter where you happen to be around the world. Welcome to this Bald Eagle play by play brought to you by explore.org and the Institute for Wildlife Studies. My name is Mike Fitz. I'm the resident naturalist with explore.org. And to talk about bald eagles in the Channel Islands with me over the next hour is the Eagle Project Lead for the Institute for Wildlife Studies, Aaron Weiner. Aaron, thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. I know a lot of people have been looking forward to this program, so thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Right now, we're looking at live footage of the Fraser Point nest with some fairly well-fed eaglets, and this nest is going to be a big focus during our program today. We have some other nests to talk about. We're going to try to incorporate some audience questions that were submitted in advance for this program. We have some video clips to break down as well. So, a lot that we have to discuss during the program today. Since this is our first play-by-play with Aaron and the Institute for Wildlife Studies, we want to show you the locations of our various webcams with them. So if you're curious about where those locations are at, let's take a quick tour right now to the Channel Islands region. This is an archipelago off the coast of southern California. And thanks to the efforts of many dedicated people, especially those with IWS, bald eagles nest in many places in the Channel Islands, but our webcams really focus on four territories currently. On Santa Catalina Island, or also known as Catalina Island, I learned today, near Los Angeles, we watch the eagles Chase and Cholin at the Two Harbors territory, while Lee and his partner Isla make their home on the west end. Farther north, on Santa Cruz Island, the largest of the Channel Islands, we look at two territories on the western side of the island. The Sauces territory is occupied by Jack and Audacity, while the Fraser Point territory is home to Andor and Cruz. Currently, only the Fraser Point territory has eaglets in the nest. So that's where we're headed back to our live footage right now and getting a really great look, Aaron, at three, like I said before, well-fed eaglets. It seems like maybe like 20, 30 minutes ago or something like that, they were getting food from one of their parents. Uh, and their job essentially, as I understand it right now, is just for them to eat and to sleep and and to defecate and to grow. Is that kind of your assessment as well?
Yeah, right now, the eaglets are growing at a really rapid rate. They're like 5, 6 weeks old at this point, and so they're sort of reaching that fuller size. And to grow as fast as eaglets do, it takes a lot of energy, and so we're seeing a lot of eating and a lot of sleeping.
And they're of the birds are of different ages, although the two oldest ones are kind of closer in size to one another than the youngest one. And if I've been able to identify the birds in the nest correctly, I think we have Sasha on the left side of the nest. Sasha's the oldest of the three, has more juvenile feathers on their body already. And then to the right of Sasha, kind of towards the far end of the nest from the camera's perspective, is Zuma. Uh, Zuma has some down feathers remaining on the head amongst their juvenile feathers. And those two birds, I think, are kind of about the same size, although I think Sasha does have a little bit of an edge in body size. And then the youngest one, Aaron, is Ryder, with lots of down feathers on the head and body. And as these birds grow over like the next week, if we were to not watch the cam for, let's say, 5-7 days and then tune in next week, what sort of appreciable differences would we see in their appearance? Because it seems almost like they change so much, I can hardly keep up with their day to day changes. Oh, and a hummingbird, just checking them out as well.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a time of rapid change for these guys right now. So if you check back in like a week, you'll probably see a lot less down. The flight feathers are really starting to come in earnest. So, as you mentioned, Sasha's the oldest. She's got the most, or they, we don't know, have got the most developed flight feathers so far. Ryder, being the youngest, has the most down. So I think you might be able to tell the most change in Ryder. Um, yeah, they're going to develop they've already developed sort of those more yellow feet. When they're younger, they're a paler color. The beaks as well, and beaks and feet continue to grow as well. So they might look like totally different eaglets in a week.
And then we did have an audience question that came in a while back when we first, I think, started, or when I was soliciting questions for this program. But Holly M. Was wondering, could you please explain the difference between the terms eaglet, fledgling, and juvenile? When does a fledged eagle transition from being referred to as a fledgling to a juvenile?
Yeah, that's a good question. My understanding of these terms, eaglet is sort of the term we use when we refer to them, the eaglets on the nest. Fledgling refers to an eaglet that has developed the muscles and feathers necessary for flight. Typically, in bald eagles, that's after about 10 weeks. They're considered to be fledglings, regardless of when they actually make their first flight. And then the term juvenile, often used to refer to a bird within its first year of life, that's no longer on a nest. So in the fall, if these guys swing past the camera again, we would refer to them as juveniles.
Well, we can't know what they're feeling exactly at the moment, but their behavior suggests that they're content. And this is one of the things that I think I enjoy most about watching, birds. I mean, there's in their nest, there are times where there are stressful moments, and we definitely want to talk about one of those later on. But there are times of contentment like this, and maybe a little bit of curiosity as well. We can, I think, see Zuma on the left there. That hummingbird keeps checking them out, and I wonder what's attracting the hummingbird to the nest. Maybe it's curious. I also kind of wonder if those big yellow feet look like a color of a flower that a hummingbird might want to visit. Because I know, if you have something bright, especially like, you know, uh, maybe yellow or red, especially. I think red, like if you're hiking around with like a red hat or red shoelaces, even hummingbirds might check you out from time to time. But I'm wondering why that hummingbird keeps coming back. This isn't the first day that we've seen it on the camera. Presuming it's the same one, it could be
Yeah,
a different one.
we've seen hummingbirds around this nest. Yeah, at least a few days running. I'm not sure what might attract the hummingbird to the nest. Certainly aren't flowers or anything like that, and it's not going to bother with the carry on the way that some other creatures do, like the mice. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's curious.
And these nests are kind of like, depending on the scale of things, ecosystems and habitat in their own right. There's so much like uneaten animal remains. Oh, there's our hummingbird once again, just hanging out. There's so many uneaten animal remains in there. So like the microbiology of these nests must be like, I think, pretty fascinating. I don't know if that's an aspect of eagle nests that has been studied very closely, but sometimes people wonder like if these are almost like acting like compost heaps. And I think that's sort of like the premise of an audience question that we got earlier uh, from Kelly, who was wondering, what is the temperature of an active composting nest, please? And we were talking earlier today about this, Aaron, and we're not sure that there's, it's not like a compost pile that you would have in your garden where the temperature can raise to like 140 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that. It. I'm not sure if they get warm because of active decomposition. Maybe they're just normal ambient air temperature, but I could be wrong about that. I really don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I couldn't give you a number for the temperature that a nest is, especially from something that's such as decomposition rather than sunlight, or like ambient temperature, the way it hangs on to heat. There certainly is decomposition happening here, so it's not the cleanest nest. You get the eaglets, especially when they're younger, they're trying to defecate off the nest, but it doesn't always work out. So you've got eagle poop mixing with carcasses. There's plenty of bugs in that nest working on those carcasses. So it's a whole little ecosystem. And to answer a bit your question or touch on that question that you had about the role they play in terms of like micro habitats, it's Something I think a lot of people in the scientific world even are curious about, and there's some preliminary literature about it, but it's a question that we're curious about what kinds of microhabitats do eagle nests create, because you do see scavengers like mice, and we see in the off season, not when the eaglets are on the nest, we'll see foxes visit to scavenge carcasses. So it is a question of like, are these eagles providing ecosystem benefits to other animals in the Channel Islands ecosystems? We'd love to learn more about that.
And it would make sense that they do, obviously, since they are, we see them as attractive habitat for other creatures. And one of the, we maybe don't talk about it on the cams that much because we're focused on bald eagles, which are not endemic to the Channel Islands. But there are a lot of endemic species in the Channel Islands region. And occasionally we see things like those special species like island fox. Like we've had island fox come and visit some of the nests from time to time, not necessarily this one. But then there's also a Santa Cruz Island mouse. I think that's a species
Mm-hmm.
that is endemic just to this island. So when I see those things on camera, I think that's a pretty special moment where we're seeing like unique species that live nowhere else, and they're taking advantage of this opportunity to find habitat amongst the bald eagles that we enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, it provides perching habitat for birds. It provides potentially food subsidies for foxes and mice. Yeah, there's a whole world of potential benefits that eagles could be providing indirectly and unintentionally.
Well, we hope that one of the parents and/or crews come down and maybe wake their kiddos up so we get a better look at them during the program today. But there was on April 24 a a kind of like a major event and kind of a scary event, certainly from the perspective of many of our webcam viewers who are watching, who are invested in the success of this nest, and certainly perhaps it was risky and perhaps frightening for the young bird, the youngest eaglet in this nest, Ryder. This happened on April 24. And Aaron, if you want to, right now, we can kind of roll through the events of April 24th, talk about what happened, and I know the audience is very curious to know a little bit more about your perspective on that situation. Does that sound all right now?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, so yeah, so the first clip that we're going to bring up here, this is from April 24th, and this is during the nighttime hours, so 3:42 a.m. Pacific time. You see, I think this is Andor, or no, this is Cruise in the Nest, excuse me, uh, and Ryder just for some reason seems to shuffle towards the edge of the nest and eventually gets into a position where they're kind of in trouble and they can't make their way back into the center of the nest. And I was curious, Aaron, if maybe the darkness played a role in this, and maybe Ryder just got a little confused about their position in the nest themselves. And then I was also wondering if you could talk a little bit about um, the eaglet's mobility at this stage
Mm.
in their life, because again, this is like a couple of weeks ago, practically now, so or approaching like 10 days, something like that. um, and they've grown a lot. They're able
Yeah.
to move around the nest a lot more now compared to then, but at this time I think Ryder was still trying to figure out how to move.
Yeah, I'll start by talking about their vision. They've got really, really excellent vision, but they are diurnal, so they're active during the day, and they're a visual hunter. So they're basically adapted to see really, really well during the day. At night, not so much. So odds are he just got, or Ryder got a little bit fidgety, maybe, and just didn't understand where they were in the space. You can see, Cruz doesn't react until you hear Ryder hit the ground. Um, and I've gotten some questions about that. Odds are, yeah, Cruz couldn't even see Ryder moving towards the edge. Um, and then about their mobility, yeah. So in this, I don't even, it's 3-4 weeks maybe, or 4 or 5 weeks that they were, and so we've seen since then a lot of development in their muscles. When they're that age, they are capable of limited mobility. They can kind of scoot around the nest the way that you see Ryder moving, but they're not. they don't have a lot of developed muscles. They're not particularly dexterous or graceful. So my guess is, yeah, Ryder was cruising around and couldn't see well and got a little too close to the edge and just couldn't recover.
And this went on for quite a while. We've been kind of looping the same 30 seconds of this clip, but we have another one from that's the same day, just like 20 minutes later. So if you check out like that timestamp, it's now 4:10 a.m. Pacific time. Ryder is still on the edge of the nest, but I think this is the moment, perhaps, where Ryder falls. So just peeking up their head. Again, I like to have an excuse to use my telestrator, but we think this is like right around the time, Aaron, where Ryder fell from the nest, and you can see that Cruz definitely is like, hey, what just happened there? But also like I can't see what's going on. So just sort of like trying to assess the situation as best as Cruz can, but almost really nothing that Cruz could do.
Yeah, it seemed like Ryder was able to cling on to the edge of the nest for a while, but continued to struggle, and eventually the struggling hurt more than it helped.
And then how high is this nest off of the ground? Sometimes we get a glimpse of the ground on the cameras. Most of the time the camera is focused on the nest itself. But so like Ryder falls from the nest, drops to the ground. How far is that drop?
Yeah, so Santa Cruz and the Channel Islands in general aren't really known for having super tall trees. So this is about 15 feet, this nest off the ground. It's also a sloped hillside. So depending on this side that Ryder fell off of, maybe
Okay.
closer to 12. And the ground underneath the nest is quite soft. So when we did learn that Ryder fell, we were optimistic that they might be in good condition.
And then later that day, once the sun came up, we were able to see things a little bit better. We could see only two eaglets in the nest. I was curious about how parent eagles react in these situations. How likely, I know people were wondering in the comments during this whole situation, they're like, how likely is it that Andor and Cruz will continue to care for Ryder on the ground, or provision Ryder with food, provide Ryder with protection? Because at this stage of life, I mean, it's not like they're close to fledging. Ryder doesn't have those flight muscles that you were talking about. The Ryder needs several more weeks of time to develop those flight muscles and feathers. So how would the parents kind of approach this situation? Clearly they would probably know that they're missing an eaglet at this point in time. Mm-hmm. But what can you tell us about how they might have behaved to care for the bird, or not?
Yeah. So we considered this, and we'll get more into the way that we approach the situation later in the Q&A, I know. We did consider the odds of Ryder's survival, given that we left Ryder on the ground. And like you said, in the past, eaglets have fallen out of the nest, but they've fallen out 9 weeks, 10 weeks. And at that age, they're not so vulnerable to predators. They've got developed muscles and feathers, so that we've seen them kind of manage to get themselves back up into the nest by hopping and grabbing branches. Some have managed to fly from the ground. Ryder, as you can see here, nowhere near fledging. Ryder is only about 3-4 weeks old at this point, with very little muscle coordination, no flight feathers to speak of, and is also fox snack sized. So we think that Ryder's odds of survival, were we to leave them on the ground, would be relatively low. Adults will, and we did see this, go and try to provision chicks that have fallen out of the nest, stay with them to guard them from predators, so standing on the ground with them. We can't really say, whether or not what Cruz and Andor would have done if we hadn't returned Ryder to the nest. We did see them flying down to the spot where Ryder was. it's possible that they might have tried to continue provisioning Ryder and stayed with Ryder to protect them. We also knew that Ryder's chances of surviving to fledge are much higher if Ryder's in the nest.
So you and you consulted, and I want to talk about this a little bit more in just a bit. But you consulted with some of your team members with the Institute for Wildlife Studies, made the decision to go help Ryder and put Ryder back in the nest. So let's take kind of a look at that a clip of you climbing the tree, putting Ryder back in the nest. I'm wondering, if you could kind of talk about what happened leading up to this point. Like as you're approaching the nest itself, what were the reaction of the parents? And can you also maybe describe what the eaglets are doing here? Because to me, from my perspective, the eaglets are trying to not attract attention, and that's kind of their instinct right now, is to hunker down in case you were something threatening.
Yeah. So because I've observed this sort of defensive response from adults in response to my presence in the area of the nest before. And basically, they're treating me like I'm a ground predator. I'm a threat. They don't know my intention is to return Ryder to the nest. I'm a large creature that could, hurt their offspring. So the behavior is called flushing, and some of the more hyper-aware adults on the islands will flush if I'm a bit careless and I'm within 500 feet, even up to, a tenth of a mile, and they see me and they just don't want me anywhere near. And so what they're doing is they're outside of the camera. You can kind of see their shadows. You can hear them calling. They're flying. They're circling the area and essentially trying to divert my attention from the nest. That's why they're not on the nest. They're trying to draw my attention away from the nest and their offspring. The eaglets, I've observed doing sort of the same thing that we're seeing here, where they huddle down in the nest and they stay really still. And it's possible chicks are more vulnerable to nest predators, especially when there's no adult at the nest. And when they're small and they've got that really, the gray, mottled gray down, it makes them very difficult to see as long as they stay still. You do see, I think that Sasha potentially pops up and hisses at me, but only once I've stuck my head up over the nest. And they know they've been made.
Yeah, it's Sasha doing a bit of their best Godzilla impression. That's kind of like when they rear up like that.
Yeah.
That's what they remind me of.
Yeah, they were hissing
at. Okay. And when you were on the ground, how hard was it for you to find Ryder? Was Ryder in an obvious spot, or did Ryder seem to shuffle away from the tree?
Yeah. So the nest is kind of in the trees in the canyon. And I basically, when I was approaching from the ridge, I knew that I needed to move quickly because this is, a major disturbance. I knew I was stressing out the chicks and the adults. So what I did was I scanned with binoculars the ground around the nest from the ridge, and I saw him or them sort of tucked next to the base of the tree. And then from there, I began my approach to the nest so that I could assess Ryder's condition.
And you gave Ryder just kind of like a quick physical check, make sure like nothing was broken or anything like that, because I think I was told that you were maybe prepared to bring Ryder to a wildlife rehab center if necessary.
Yes. So the plan as it came together, 1A was, if Ryder is okay, put them back in the nest. 1B was if there is a notable injury, then we would remove Ryder from the wild and get them help at a wildlife care facility. So what I did was after locating the eaglet, got down to the base of the tree, approached really carefully, wanted to make sure I wasn't stepping on him. And I just did a quick health assessment. And so what I did was I moved Ryder's wings and Ryder's legs to see that they were articulating correctly. That was to check for breaks. And then I did a visual examination of Ryder's body condition. So, are there scrapes? Was he impaled by something when he fell? You know, and then also just behavioral observation. So, is Ryder behaving as you might expect a stressed chick to? But, Ryder was struggling, and when struggling, moving normally, Ryder appeared alert. So, at that point, I felt that all signs were positive in terms of Ryder had kind of weathered this fall without significant injury that would require removal from the wild.
And you were also thinking, it certainly looks like, about your own safety in this situation. You have a helmet on, you have material covering your face and neck. Can you talk about some of the safety considerations that you were mindful of for your own well-being? And I know that you had a partner that was helping you out in this situation too.
Yeah. So I wanted to make sure that we had a couple of important safety measures. First, that we could access the nest safely. 15 feet isn't tall, but it's not short. So we ended up we had an extension ladder that was tall enough for me to get, access to the nest.
I was wondering about that, actually. I was like, how did you just shuffle up the tree like that? That's great climbing.
Yes, that's I'm standing on a ladder, and the ladder, while just being a little bit shorter than the nest, as you can see, was tall enough for me to climb it in a safe way to get to the top of the nest, be able to put Ryder back in the nest. So making sure, first, that we had the equipment to actually get into the nest. There's not much I can do for Ryder if I can't get into the nest. And then with any wildlife handling, you want to make sure that you've got the proper PPE. So that was gloves for my hands, just protect me from anything on Ryder from anything on me, and then a gaiter as well. I used a face mask, just another way to protect myself from any germs Ryder's carrying, and vice versa. And the helmet, of course, because I was 12 feet up.
Let's take a look at the live footage now, because we've gotten a really good look at the trio in that clip as we were seeing you return Ryder to the nest, and we can see just now how different they look just really at 10 days time or something like that. So quite amazing rate of growth for these birds. Aaron, I know there's a lot of people who are thanking you for making that effort to give Ryder a chance to live their best life as a wild bird and succeed as a fledgling and a juvenile, hopefully in the future. In your opinion, how is Ryder maybe doing 1 week after or 10 days after their adventure?
Ryder appears to be doing well. I've been checking in daily to make sure that my little buddy has stayed put. Initially, I think there was some stress, and people were concerned about Ryder not feeding with their siblings. To that, I would say, Ryder's the smallest, he eats last, but also there's a stress of the ordeal, which could either, restrict Ryder's ability to compete for food or possibly decrease appetite. Since then, we've seen crews do some, I think some of the viewers call it private feedings, which I like, where crews basically steps in front of the larger hungry siblings and blocks them and feeds Ryder specifically. And I've since stopped being concerned about Ryder. They seem to be doing well, growing as we might expect, getting enough food, getting along with their siblings.
And showing some initiative too. I've seen, trying to do a little bit of self-feeding, maybe being a little more assertive during family feeding time as well. And I think those are all real positive signs for Ryder.
Yeah, I agree.
And before we move on from the Fraser Point nest, there's one more point about the Ryder situation that I wanted to discuss with you, because I know a lot of our audience members are very curious about the intervention policy for the Institute for Wildlife Studies. And we had sort of a representative question that came in advance, and this one came from Alicia, who was wondering, could you touch on the policy behind rescuing Ryder? I thought that most interventions at eagle nests were only in the case of human-caused incidents.
Yeah, and that's a great question because it gets at exactly the rule of thumb for intervention. That is the rule of thumb that when the case is it's caused by humans, we try to fix the problem that we created. This was not that, right? This was natural or a normal thing that happens. Sometimes eaglets fall out of nests. And so the way we proceeded was to take into consideration three major points. First, again, that chance that Ryder would survive on the ground. And as I mentioned, Ryder at that point was too young to get back into the nest on their own. And while it was possible that adults would feed and sit with Ryder on the ground, because of Ryder's age, chances of survival were greatly diminished. So then the next consideration is feasibility of the rescue. Where was I? I was already on the island for monitoring, incidentally. So that was already a point in favor of the rescue. How is accessing Fraser Point Nest? Fraser Point Nest is actually pretty easy to get to, all things considered. It was a drive across the island and then about a quarter-mile approach. So it was easy for me to get to. And then do we have appropriate equipment and personnel to access the nest? So we had PPE on hand, everything I needed, the helmet, the gloves, the mask, and then the ladder and TNC, the Nature Conservancy, loaned me Lauren, who was very helpful holding the ladder, making sure that I didn't take a fall. So feasibility check, that it is possible. The risks to me are low. But then we do examine risk a little bit more here, and that's to eagles, chicks, and personnel. So there's one major consideration that we have, which is parental nest abandonment. That can happen usually when they are on eggs. Human disturbance can cause adults to abandon a nest, not so much after they hatch. So we knew the risk is relatively low, and we can also minimize it by making sure that I'm in and out as fast as possible. We're also thinking about threats to the other chicks, right? We don't want to return one eaglet to the nest at the expense of another eaglet. With that, there's the stress from my presence and the possibility of nest predation, which is also possible to mitigate by moving quickly. And then, of course, risk to myself, which we already covered. I had appropriate PPE, I had help, I had a ladder. And then finally, there was precedent. Researchers with Institute for Wildlife Studies have rescued chicks that fell out of the nest before. Peter Sharp, who ran the project, was the director of the project for 27 years, had returned chicks to nests on occasion where we felt it was appropriate, and he was consulted in the development of the plan. So because we, felt that all of the stars aligned in the sense that we could help this individual, we had the resources, the people were in the right places, and the materials we needed were on hand, and we felt we could do it with minimal risk. We decided to move forward with rescue.
Well, thank you for that explanation. I mean, it underscores just how many considerations you have in a situation like this, and just how many things have to be right. I mean, the fact that you were just on the island alone was things going in the right direction for Ryder in that situation, because you could have been on Catalina, you could have been on a different island. You just happened to luck out being on Santa Cruz at that time.
Yeah, definitely. If I had been on a different island or even the mainland, there would have been a 24-hour lag between when we knew he fell and when I could have gotten out there at the very soonest. And, the longer Ryder spends on the ground, the more at risk he is. So it was, as far as eaglets falling out of the nest is lucky, it was lucky.
Getting a great look at a bit more activity in this nest right now. I think we might have a chance to come back and talk about the Fraser Point nest a little bit more later on in the program. But we do have other nests and other birds that we want to talk to. In fact, let's head to the Sauce's nest right now, or Sauce's territory, because we do have one of the birds, or maybe both of the adults in sort of a secondary nest. Uh, that this pair earlier this year, Aaron, had tried like their main nest. Their eggs broke. They weren't successful there. I think they maybe perhaps tried to lay eggs in this nest as well. And I was, maybe since we're seeing them in this secondary nest, I'm curious about, you know, eagles moving from one location to another within their territory. Do they often have like more than one nest that they might try if it doesn't really work out for them in their first choice nest? Maybe they'll move on to like another one and say, hey, let's try it over here.
Yeah, it varies from territory to territory so far as we've seen. When some pairs have really, really high site fidelity, so they really like staying in their one spot. Um, we have, I mean, like Two Harbors is an example. They've been on that tour for 20 years. I think they moved slightly further down the tour and then they moved a little bit further up the tour. So they've really stayed in the same spot. But then we have a territory on Santa Rosa Island that has three different nests that they maintain and they just
Huh.
move between them. So often it seems like every year they're moving to one of the three nests and using a different one. And they're all very, very close to each other. This is the, yeah, they've used the same nest this year as they used last year. And I was surprised. I really thought that because they had used it the year before, they weren't going to use it this year. So yeah, it varies and we're not, and sometimes, pairs will pick up and they'll move to a different part of the island. So Fraser Point actually did that. They used to be on the north coast of Santa Cruz, so the other side of the ridge, and then they moved south to where they currently are. And we're not really sure what drives movement. Definitely, if a nest falls out. So there's another territory on Santa Rosa Island this year. I visited last year's nest, and it had slumped out of the tree, and I looked down a canyon, and they had made a new one. And sometimes it's more complex than that, and it could be, a variety of factors. Maybe the nest is in a more sheltered spot. Maybe the local marine environment is more abundant. We're not sure, and we'd love to do some, research to sort of try to parse it out.
The pair on this territory, on the Sauces territory, Jack and Audacity, they're a very popular pair for our Explorador eagle watching community. And many people cheer for their success each year. We know, though, that Audacity has had her struggles, especially like during the last 6 years or so, getting eggs to hatch. These pairs, they're very experienced parents. It seems like if they can get one of their eggs to hatch, like that eaglet has a really high survival rate. So they do great once the eaglet hatches. It's really kind of like getting those eggs to that hatching point. And Audacity this year really was, the same unfortunate story for her. We have a clip from earlier this year with one of her first eggs. And this egg, like basically all of them, just just broke eventually. Um, I think this is maybe the first egg that she laid, and there's a lot of hope that hey, then maybe this egg is the shell is strong enough, it'll survive the incubation period. We have another clip from Audacity in this nest with an egg breaking from that first
Mm-hmm.
clutch. So you can see there's two eggs in the nest right now, one of them clearly broken. And then Audacity did this. I think she had three eggs maybe in her first clutch, and then all three of those broke. She started a second clutch, and all of those broke as well. And we have a clip of Audacity's egg breaking almost immediately upon being laid. So again, this was March 22nd. Audacity laid an egg, and it really didn't even survive minutes. Um, we had a lot of audience questions about this, Aaron. People are wondering about Audacity's struggles, and I think if I could maybe distill what people are wondering about in just one question that I can toss to you is, what hypotheses or what ideas might be the cause of Audacity's reproductive struggles, especially during the last 6-7 years.
Yeah. Audacity's story, I think, resonates with a lot of people. just because of the way she keeps on going. And like you mentioned, when her eggs do hatch, I think she is at 100%. If you know her eggs, if the chicks hatch, the chicks fledge. But her hatch rate's really low. It's 18%. So I would love to just lay some numbers out to kind of give a picture. I think a lot of people ask about that 18% hatch rate and the status of DDT contamination in the waters. And we know that DDT and its metabolite DDE drove the extinction of bald eagles from the Channel Islands originally back in the 50s. So when people see hatch rate as low as Audacity's, they worry that DDE is a factor. Right now, our interpretation of the situation is that there's little evidence suggests that Audacity's thin eggshells are actually linked to high concentrations of DDE in the water near sauces. And I will just going to lay out, a couple of numbers to kind of lead people to why we think that right now. So Audacity's hatch rate is 18%. She's been the female at this territory from 2014 to 2025. The overall hatch rate of Santa Cruz Island is from 2009 to 2025 is 59%. If you remove Audacity, who is an outlier, it's 73%. So across the island, Santa Cruz in general, we're seeing pretty good hatch rates. Actually, very good hatch rates, far higher than Audacity's. So we're thinking, okay, this is maybe not a trend around the island itself. If you look at the archipelago, between 2009 to 2025, hatch rate is 64%, still much higher than Audacity's. And if you just look at the two territories near sauces, so Fraser Point is just to the northwest. The hatch rate at Fraser Point is 89%. And then the next neighboring territory is the Malva Real territory. It's kind of to the southeast, 65% hatch rate there. So we're seeing, okay, the hatch rate across the island looks good. The hatch rate in the neighboring territories looks good. So maybe it's a question of that particular area of sauces being more contaminated than other parts of the island. However, there was a previous female at this territory, A27, who was an Alaskan bird, present in the territory from 2010 to 2013. Her hatch rate was 57%. So there was a bird prior to Audacity who was able to lay and incubate eggs successfully here. So altogether, we're seeing, okay, there's not a concerning trend across the archipelago. There's not a concerning trend across Santa Cruz Island. There's not a concerning trend on the western side of Santa Cruz, which is why we think that Audacity's case is maybe linked more to Audacity's genetics, potentially. She could have an issue with maybe calcium deposition that's unrelated to local pollutants. Another possible reason could be her diet, and that would be DDE related. It's possible that Audacity prefers scavenging marine mammals. Theoretically, marine mammals would have higher concentrations of DDE stored in their fatty tissue. That has to do with the way that pollutants move up the trophic cascade. So animals at higher order, basically consumers, will have more DDE in their bodies. The truth is, though, that we just don't know. We are really interested in learning more about her hatching issues, but we are happy to report that we don't see it as a widespread problem that could threaten the population at large.
Yeah, so certainly a mystery surrounding, Audacity's struggles overall. What could you potentially do to learn more about her situation, especially if there's anything that the cam watchers could do through their observations of the webcams?
Yeah, a couple of things that we could sort of put in motion, especially as it relates to the live cams. We can't well track or closely track Audacity's feeding habits when she's not on the camera, but we can track her diet when she's on the nest. So seeing if she's bringing back like prey items that are at higher risk for DDT contamination. So that would be just anything that is higher up in the food chain. So that would be one thing we could do. We could potentially hire on a tech to help track Audacity's movements during the non-breeding season, see where she's foraging, if that's linked to her, eggshell thinness. And then also we're really interested in using our long-term data. So we've been collecting data on this population just on Santa Cruz Island since 2006, across the archipelago, even bigger data set than that. And we're really interested in using that data to conduct studies that are targeted at uncovering some possible reasons why low hatch rates might occur on the islands.
So lots of things to watch for, certainly, on this camera. And we really do, wish Jack and Audacity the best success. I think, one of the big lessons that we can take away from this, Aaron, is that, the decisions that people make have these long-lasting consequences. It's really hard to correct those mistakes of the past. But when we're making decisions now in regard to wildlife and ecosystems and what we're putting into these environments, like the decisions that we make now, we can make good choices. We can make better choices than people did in the past. So birds, like in the future, don't maybe necessarily have to deal with some of the same situations that we're imposing on them now.
Yeah, and that strikes at the heart of it, right? We can't change the decisions we've made. We can try to correct them as best we can, and we can try in each of our individual and collective powers to make better choices and to push people in power to make those choices.
And real quick, before we move on from Jack and Audacity here, we saw both of the birds in this nest when we switched over to this view, and they looked like they were kind of moving sticks around. It's not likely that they're going to have any eggs this year, so we're going to have to wait until next year for them. But I was wondering if you could just talk real quick, Aaron, about sort of like the bonding process for eagle pairs on their territories, kind of fussing with the nest a little bit, billing with each other, maybe a little bit of allopreening here and there. How does that help sort of like maintain and strengthen bonds? Because it's like a year-round relationship for them, even though their reproductive cycle is very much sort of like in a concentrated amount of time.
Yeah. You see a lot of interactions for all of our pairs. Like Chase and Cholin are on the nest right now, but live camera, people watching live cams will see them interact, bring each other prey items. A lot of really, I think, bonding leading into the breeding season occurs like January is a lot more intensively taking care of the nest, bringing each other food, having other bonding moments, but pretty much year round, they'll visit the nest. They'll keep it. They'll keep adding to it. Basically, they don't do the sort of intensive overhaul of the nest. Oh, I love the way they hop off. They don't do the intensive overhaul until January when they're bringing the fluff in and they're forming the nest bowl and all that stuff. But certainly they spend time together in the territory year round.
And it would be when I see eagles like taking off from a nest, I think about like that, for me, like that moment of freedom for them, like here we go. And if I could do one thing as another animal for just for like a few moments, that would be it. I'd be like a peregrine on the edge of a cliff or an eagle on their nest, and I just jump off and just soar. And I think that would be just the most amazing experience. So thanks for I think about that.
Oh, I do too. I think of it when I'm watching them in the field. I'm doing my observations. I call it form envy. I think that humans kind of got the short end of the stick with our form. We can walk, I guess, and use opposable thumbs, but I'd rather fly.
And there's, one other, a couple of the nests that we haven't talked about yet, a couple other territories. I think maybe right before we began our program, there was an eagle on the West End territory. I keep watching to see if those eagles will show up on our cameras. Currently, it seems like they are not in view. But I do want to, as I keep looking for birds on the West End nest, I do want to take the opportunity to discuss with you what's happened at Two Harbors this year. And of course, maybe just kind of like talking about the legacy of Chase and Cholin there. They're not on their nest right now. Cholin had a kind of a rough year, had broken eggs, wasn't able to successfully reproduce. So we saw that she, had a tough year overall. But her and Chase have continued to bond. They've continued to like hang out on their nests. They've been moving sticks around. Um, they are seem to be really like a cemented pair. Like their relationship does seem really strong. And I was wondering about Cholin's age, because Cholin is not a young bird. Cholin, you reminded me earlier today, is 28 years old. So a very experienced bird, but certainly a bird
Mm.
that's towards the upper end of the lifespan for bald eagles. And I was wondering if you could just talk about maybe Cholin's challenges as she reaches nearly 30 years of age, and maybe like also talk about her legacy as a bird on the Channel Islands, and what her success has meant in the past to like the overall success of birds in this area.
Yeah. So I'll just start with repeating that. Jolyn is 28. I think the lifespan of a wild eagle is typically thought to be about 30. The oldest bird reported on the Channel Islands was 31. So she is, and Chase as well. Chase is also 28. They hatched in the same year. They're getting up
Okay.
there in years. So they haven't successfully fledged a chick since 2023. That was when they last fledged. And I'm trying to remember how many that was. I think it was just one, maybe, maybe one or two. I can't. I wasn't actually on the program then, so I'm not sure, but I'm sure the viewers do. Um, and it's a something that we typically see in or a trend that we see in wild animals where the age of the breeding pair is correlated usually to their success. So younger breeding pairs have lower success because they're still figuring out what they're doing. We saw that this year with West End, Isla, and Lee, and we'll talk more about them, I think, later in the program. But Isla laid an egg and almost seemed to not understand what it was. Um,
Hmm.
and then on the other hand, when the birds get to an older age, we typically see breeding success start to decline. My predecessor, Dr. Sharp, told me anecdotally that he typically saw breeding success start to fall when birds pass the age of 25. However, Chase and Cholin do seem super devoted to each other. They've been a pair for 22 years. They first nested in Two Harbors in 2003. So I think we can expect to continue to see them around, and we can keep rooting for them. But the future of their breeding success is uncertain. Regardless, though, they have like you said, left a lasting impact on the recovery of the bald eagle on the Channel Islands. In the since 2003, they fledged 23 eaglets. 14 of those eaglets fledged after we had stopped manipulating the nests. So we were no longer going in and putting decoy eggs and then artificially incubating. So that was just 14 eaglets that they raised all on their own. One of those eaglets was actually Thunder, the first natural fledge from their nest in 2009, who went on to be the West End female, a very beloved West End female for, I think, 5 years. Just like their ability to successfully raise eaglets to maintain a steady presence in a territory has greatly contributed to the recovery of the eagles in the area, and has also just brought a great amount of joy to, I think, their viewers as well.
It's a special story for sure, and there's a potential again for these birds to find reproductive success next year, even though as they age, like you said, it can be a greater challenge for them. But that legacy extends to like many of these other territories. And if I can ask our producer Brian maybe to go to the West End Overlook cam, this is a very pretty view of the West End territory. But we you had thunder living on this territory for a number of years, doing well, facing challenges there as well with like ravens and interloping eagles coming in and challenging thunder. We know that there's been a lot of turnover on this territory over the last 16 months, 18 months, or something like that. So, that's, I think that must be like just part of life for eagles, Aaron, is, there's some birds that have like this steady presence, like Chase and Cholin. It's remarkable that they've held the territory for so long. And then you have other areas like the West End where it seems like for a while there were like birds coming every day to challenge and try to establish their mark on this territory. And it looks like Isla and Lee currently are the birds that are going to be here, but they weren't able to, raise a clutch this year. But there's a lot of hope for any bird that holds this territory in the future.
Yeah, it's a great territory. And we've seen that just by how productive it's been and how long it's been active. Yeah, like I mentioned, they laid an egg and it was breached by a raven when it was left unattended, but we don't really see it as a cause for concern. It's really typical of younger birds to have lower breeding success, so you just got to give them some time. Like you mentioned, we've been seeing a lot of young eagles in the area. We can't say for certain what is driving the turnover, but it could potentially be competition for space. And hopefully we see a new pair become dominant soon, and hopefully it's Isla and Lee.
And in a sense, at least in my mind, and I view sort of like the competition between birds for territories in the Channel Islands as a good thing. I mean, for the birds, it's stressful. They can get injured, they can get hurt, right? So I don't want to discount that aspect of the situation. But when there is competition for territories, that means that the population is maybe doing really well. Because in the past, especially when the Institute for Wildlife Studies was starting their intervention efforts, there are not a lot of eagles on the islands. There's no reason for the eagles to compete for a territory because you can just go over to the next canyon, hang out there, find enough food, right? But when the population is maybe near a higher level of saturation or a carrying capacity, then that's when you're going to see more of this competition between birds for territories.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it as a positive issue on a broader in a broader sense. We have competition for space because we've got a lot of birds, and if you look back to the 1950s, to the 1970s, and the 1980s, when this was getting off the ground, the issue is that there was no birds. So I see it as a positive sign that recovery is happening. There's eagles back on these landscapes, and that was the goal from the start.
And with a couple minutes that we have remaining in our program, let's head back to the Fraser Point nest because we have, again, our birds resting there. We did have, while we were talking about some of the other nests, we did have a parent show up and bring a bundle of grass delivered to the nest, and the eaglets looked and were like, hey, that's not food. Okay, we're going to go back to resting right now. The Institute for Wildlife Studies, Aaron, does a lot of wonderful work for bald eagles and other wildlife. And with just a little time remaining that we have on our program, I'm wondering if you could tell us what we could do to support your work for bald eagles or for other animals, especially with everything else that IWS does.
Yeah. So the big thing right now, we're having our annual fundraiser. We call it the Nest Adoption Challenge. Historically, the goal has been to have people, give the people opportunity to adopt a nest, and that comes with naming an eaglet. But generally, what the purpose is to raise money for this work that we do with the bald eagles. Getting me out there on the ground, monitoring them, setting up our trail cameras, doing rescues. That's possible because of donors who have funded our program. So engaging that way, but also just engaging with us through social media. We have Instagram, we have Facebook, following the project, keeping tabs on these guys through our live streams. And all donations, they go to our general fund, so they can support eagle research, but we also do so much other great work with mountain lions, with amphibians, pronghorn. So we're trying to do our best to help the species we share this world with.
Well, we thank you for your work, and I certainly thank you for your time speaking with us today. I learned a lot from you, and yeah, I know you have a super busy field season, but we should do this again sometime. If not this year, then certainly next spring.
I would love to do this again. It was a great time. Thank you for having me.
And my co-host today for this play-by-play with the Institute for Wildlife Studies has been Aaron Weiner. Aaron is the Eagle Project Lead for the Institute for Wildlife Studies. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. We hope you enjoyed the program. My name is Mike Fitz with explore.org. And until we talk to you again, enjoy the birds and good luck to these wonderful eaglets on the Fraser Point nest.